Now, if I went into a side business selling Bergdahl Christmas ornaments that you could hang from trees, do you think I might make any money from such an idea? 7 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 38 at our studios. This is News Radio 1310 KLIX. You can also hear us online anywhere around the world, newsradio1310.com. And I thank you for joining us today. Some of the things we're going to be talking about a bit later in the program. Ken Menzel is expected to join us, dropping by from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. Also, new details on that German plane that has crashed and some fascinating things I found on Facebook this morning before Facebook pulled the plug on a potential motive for the pilot who is now believed to have crashed the plane into the mountainside. And lastly, on that tease list is the big story of the day, the top story, and that is our own Bo Bergdahl from right here in the state of Idaho. And I've got to tell you, as this story was coming down yesterday, I thought it's only about 5-6 months too late. We have been sitting around knowing exactly what happened in this situation for a very long time, but a great many people who have served in the military and a number of people currently serving, and they had to tell the story without giving their identities, claim that the White House was dragging its feet for a very, very long time on any charges against Bergdahl being announced, simply because it's an embarrassment to the Obama White House, which traded 5 cutthroats who are now back on the battlefields in Afghanistan, where we are still going to leave 9,000 troops for the next several years, and they'll be firing at those troops of ours, traded 5 cutthroats for a man who apparently got up and walked away knowingly from his post. I've got some details here today that back up some of the horrible, horrible things that caused, almost a cascading effect on a great many of the troops in the area, and it really slowed the war effort as well for the United States. We're now learning all of these details in light of the announcement yesterday. Some of you may have actually seen that or heard that. A colonel from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, appeared without taking any questions before the media, gave a synopsis of the charges, mentioned that the case is now moving on to Fort Sam Houston in Texas, where Bergdahl is currently stationed. And he could, on one charge, the charge of desertion, he could end up going to prison for 5 years. On the second charge, he could end up going to prison for life. Now, in the politically correct universe we're in today, he is not facing any sort of capital crime here. There would have been a time in the U.S. military where a fellow like this would have been lined up against a wall and just simply shot. So Bergdahl already is getting the benefit of a politically correct era in the United States. Times have changed greatly over the last 50, 60, 70 years, and because of that, he may be spared. But that's not the case, and I'm going to tell you in a few minutes, as many as 8 people may have been killed because of the search for him after his desertion. 8 Americans who were parents or sons or daughters or brothers or sisters, and I'll share that with you coming up in just a few minutes. But in the meantime, if you'd like to reach our program, I have a caller waiting patiently now at the moment. You'd like to maybe chime in on this subject, you can reach us at 736-0300. That is 736-0300. Or you can email me, Bill Colley, and that is bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. Colley. And you're up next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hi, Bill. Hey, I'm just a little peon here, but I do not understand why Barack Hussein is not being charged with, like, treason.
Well, there was a couple of people I noticed writing in a publication today, one called the Daily Beast, the other in the Wall Street Journal, saying, yeah, somebody's got to answer about harming U.S. security by making this swap.
Yes. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for the input. This is coming from a columnist writing for the Daily Beast. This fellow, Nathan Bradley Bethea. That's his full name, Nathan Bradley Bethea. I should also point out, he knew of Bergdahl when he was serving in Afghanistan. And he is writing in the Daily Beast about the fallout from Bergdahl's desertion. And he said it was obvious he had deserted because he neatly piled up most of his uniform and his vest. And he just piled them up in a little pile by his station before he decided to bug out. Now, he had been telling a lot of his fellow troops he planned to go to India. He had a compass. That was the only thing he took with him. And I guess the compass was going to direct his way there, and then he could go live on an ashram for the rest of his life. If this guy had just gone to his CO and said, you know what? I have some issues with this war. And here they are. Now, he may have ended up with a dishonorable discharge. or they may have just sent him home. And none of this would have gotten completely out of hand. What's also interesting is Bergdahl was writing his dad. And I remember seeing his dad in that Rose Garden news conference, and the first thing I thought was hippie. With the long hair and the ponytail and the granola chomping hippie that settled in Haley, Idaho, raised his son to believe in all sorts of granola chomping and old folk music and the like. There's a letter between correspondence between father and son, and in the letter to his dad, Bergdahl writes in very good English. He has written a letter in his defense now, which was published yesterday in the Washington Post. It is rife with spelling errors. And I'm wondering if part of his legal defense is going to be, and maybe his lawyer said, tell everybody you're an idiot. Because reading that, when he spells severe, S-I-V-I-E-R-E, you get the idea that something has gone haywire there. But he wrote this long explanation about all the dozen times he supposedly tried to escape, even though he claims to have been in a cage most of the time. I guess you just hop along, you put your legs down through the bars in the cage and hop along with the cage around you, or, hold on to the bars with your hands. You wouldn't attract much attention other than the bang, bang, bang as you were going down the road. From the noise of the cage bouncing up and down on the dirt. I was going to say pavement, but not in that part of the world. So Bergdahl has written to his dad, and he's a very articulate letter to his dad. On the other hand, the letter that he sent to the folks at Fort Bragg is just incoherent, and it's rambling and just rife with misspellings. So they're already trying to set him up as just being some sort of dolt, and hoping that because he's a dolt, that he could get off on the charges. But this fellow, Nathan Bradley Bethea, and what I did is I highlighted some of this. It's a very, very long story. It's very gut-wrenching. But this is what he has to say. On July 4, 2009, a human wave of insurgents attacked the joint U.S.-Afghan outpost at Zerak. 2 Americans died and many more received wounds. So 2 dead, right? One of my close friends was the company executive officer for the unit at Zerak, and he goes on to write, in his opinion, the attack would not have happened had his company received its normal complement of intelligence, aircraft, drones, planes, and the like. But instead, every intelligence aircraft available in theater had received new instructions, find Bergdahl. So 2 dead because of this man's actions. We go on then to Mr. Bethea's own account of what happened to people he knew. Though the 2009 Afghan presidential election slowed the search for Bergdahl, it did not stop. He writes, our battalion suffered 6 fatalities in a 3-week period. On August 18, an IED killed Private First Class Morris Walker and Staff Sergeant Clayton Bowen during a reconnaissance mission. On 26 August, while conducting a search for a Taliban shadow sub-governor supposedly affiliated with Bergdahl's captors, Staff Sergeant Kurt Curtis was shot in the face and killed. On September 4, during a patrol to a village near the area in which Bergdahl vanished, an insurgent ambush killed 2nd Lieutenant Darren Andrews and gravely wounded Private First Class Matthew Martinek, who died of his wounds a week later. On September 5, while conducting a foot movement toward a village also thought affiliated with Bergdahl's captors, Staff Sergeant Michael Murphy stepped on an improvised landmine. He died the next day. And he writes, it is important to name all of these names. For the veterans of the units that lost these men, Bergdahl's capture and subsequent hunt for him will forever tie to their memories and to a time in their lives that will define them as people. He has finally returned. Those men will never have the opportunity. So there are 8 dead total. 8 people dead total because of this. We still don't know if Bergdahl shared all sorts of inside secrets as well with his captors. It could well be that he did, and he may be just constructing this notion that he was this hapless fellow who then got captured and was locked up and tortured and beaten, and he seems to have a very vivid imagination. 816, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have another caller, and you're on the air.
Yes, and then Bergdahl's team put out a statement here. And I thought, okay, that's good. He's going to apologize for all the problems he caused. But no, it was a list of his conditions of captivity, as if we're supposed to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
And he should have put out, at the very least, an apology for the people who died doing this. It shows his narcissism. This is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, and so the concept is, it seems like his legal team is going to say he suffered enough. And also, I'm curious if anybody's heard. At first, they said when he got out, he wouldn't communicate with his family. I'm wondering if he's still doing that.
And I saw a story today. Apparently, one of the local elected leaders in Haley has said that the community still supports him. What is wrong with
Haley.
those people?
That's Haley. That's Sun Valley.
Yeah, but it shows you they're just. They despise the country. They despise the whole notion of the military. They despise anything about the war. But that was the war in Afghanistan that was fought after 9/11 because we had 3,000 fellow citizens killed, and these people still believe that we deserved it.
That's liberal Idaho.
Surely is. I thank you much for the call, sir. Gladly, it's only a small geographic portion of the state. It's just, it's absolutely twisted and sickening. 8 people died because of what he did, at least that we know of directly. 8! Those families will never see those people again. You're up next, and you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Yeah, Bill, because of business reasons, I'm up in Ketchum and Sun Valley and Haley and Bellevue all the time. And I'm going to tell you, they are not supporting this guy like it may seem. Sure, there are people that are always trying to be politically correct for fear of especially elected officials. What's new? So, but they're generally speaking, they're not in support of him. In fact, he's a non-issue, and in fact, in some cases, he's an embarrassment, as he should be.
Yeah,
not everybody up there is off their rocker, but I realize there are still quite a few that are, though.
And those are the people who will be screaming the loudest, as the previous caller said, that he suffered enough. I thank you very much for the telephone call. You wouldn't have suffered, Bo, if you had just gone to your CEO and said, I no longer have the conscience to support what I'm doing. And at that point, I had a friend, he left the Navy that way. I went to college with a guy. He just simply got up one day and said he didn't want to do his push-ups anymore. And he was in OCS, Officers Candidate School. And the drill instructor said, was that it? Are you sure? And he said, yes. And he said, all right, well, get your gear together and you can go home. They have ways of getting rid of people today who don't want to be there in these situations, especially because they hurt the morale and the unit cohesion. So that's all he had to do was come forward and say, I'm done. He may have had to put up with some time in a brig, for instance, but it could have been any dereliction of duty or something along those lines. The fact of the matter is, he would have been out long ago, even if that worst-case scenario had happened. The guy's a fool. He's a gold-dang fool. And anybody who supports him, you are tacitly supporting the fact and approving that 8 people died in the search for this guy. 8. Horribly. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. More on this subject. More about Bo Bergdahl coming up in just a couple of minutes. 38 at our studios. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to be joined by Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. I got a couple of topics to talk with him, especially warmer weather. You know what that means, too. A lot more drunks. No, we shouldn't say that. Sometimes there are a lot of them out actually, there was a large group of them out March 17th. I don't know why. Something about that day seems to encourage it. You're listening, by the way, to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you can reach the show by dialing 736-0300. That's 736-0300. I was mentioning Bo Bergdahl in the last segment of the program, and obviously we've got a lot of people who have opinions on that. If you'd like to share them, 736-0300 again is the telephone number. The Wall Street Journal, which is somewhat of a big newspaper in this country, they are writing about this particular issue in an editorial today, and it says Mr. Obama, he's the president, for you liberals who may not know that, said he had a sacred obligation as commander-in-chief to do everything possible to bring the sergeant home. Maybe so, but the president made his real motives clear when he noted that the transfer was part of the, quote, transition process of ending a war, unquote, and that he wanted to whittle away the number of Gitmo detainees. These guys are down there eating ice cream sandwiches and playing soccer all day. I mean, come on. What? This whole notion that somehow that they are being mistreated. Then he told NBC is going to involve on occasion releasing folks who we may not trust but we can't convict. And it says he's more concerned with pursuing his own ideology than with actually doing the right thing. It mentions the war shows no signs of coming to an end. In fact, he's just pledged we're going to have to keep troops there. The Taliban, by the way, can look forward to getting their old commanders back. And Sergeant Bergdahl, and these commanders were in Qatar, but they're only there for a year, and then they get released and they go back to the battlefield. It says Sergeant Bergdahl will now face a court-martial, but we already know that the White House is guilty of deserting its obligations to U.S. security. We have another caller with us. It's 825. You're up next on KLIX.
Morning, Bill. Welcome to the area, my side. Yeah, I was in Vietnam, and I didn't want to be there either, but I still, did my job that I was put there to do. And when this guy walked away from us, they had that all over TV. I don't know why they're not showing it.
There are people, I guess, in media who like to say, well, we need to get all the facts in first. But all the testimony from all of the people who were there with him says this was a deliberate and conscious effort to get out.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of guys that I was with over in Vietnam didn't want to be there either. But it's still, we had a job to do. And I know guys that would get up and walk out, but they never completed the walkout. I mean, they turned around and came back because they felt the need to, fulfill what they started out to do.
Yeah. I don't blame people for having those doubts now and then either. And I thank you much for the call. People are going to be in those crisis situations. You're under a lot of pressure where sometimes it just gets to you. But you get a few minutes to stand back and think about what you're doing. Hey, no one's going to blame you for that if you return and actually fulfill your duty. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on NewsRadio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill. Robert Steele is a former clandestine case officer for the CIA. He put his name in for nomination for the president in the last election, but just like anyone who cares for this country, he didn't even get close. Robert Steele has gone on the record to say that they now have enough evidence to indict Dick Cheney for involvement in 9/11. By this lie, they created the war in Afghanistan. They sucked all these little dingbats who buy into all these lies into going over there and sacrificing.
Where do you guys keep coming? Whoa! Where do you guys keep? Where is all of this evidence he supposedly has about Dick Cheney? We hear this all the time from all of you, you coast to coast kooks out there. Where do you come up with all of this? Because no one else has it. It's like it's out there in the ether somewhere, and you're apparently it's come to you through osmosis. But where do you find it?
You can get it online, Bill. It's easy to find for somebody.
Because everything on the internet is true, isn't it?
No, it's easy for somebody to find who wants to look at the truth. If you don't want to look at it, you're never going to get it.
Cuckoo, 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 cuckoo. Oh, my Lord. Where do these people... He's sitting around late at night under a dark lamp, reading all of these obscure websites and all of this fiction that people come up with about this. We have been through this 9/11 so-called truther movement to the point where it's been... So many people have looked at it. Now, I remember reading the report they put out about it. There were mistakes that were made in advance of it. I was doing an interview with Alan Keyes. Some of you may remember him. He was the fellow who lost to Mr. Obama in the U.S. Senate race in Illinois in 2004. And after we got off air, Mr. Keyes said to me, he said, look, I haven't said it publicly, but he said, Condoleezza Rice really, she dropped the ball on this one. He said, and I don't think she has the wherewithal to do the job that she has. That was when she was in national security, even before she moved up into that role of Secretary of State. And so that was quite an admission from someone on the right. But all it tells you is there were people who just didn't see what was coming, or they ignored something that they should have paid a little bit more attention to. Is that a crime? I don't know about that. It's human character flaw, I guess. But all of you people out there who, Dick Cheney was sitting around because he wanted to invade Afghanistan, because Afghanistan has all that. Well, they don't actually have anything that we want. Okay. So what's his motivation? Well, he just doesn't like Afghans, the knitted kind. But he got it confused, so he wanted to go over there and give those people the what for. I think you're going to have to do a little bit better, pal. Ken Menzel is coming up next from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. He's got a couple of people on the most wanted list. Well, if you could help find them, that would be a good thing. Details on the way in just a few minutes. It's 8:39 at News Radio 1310 KLIX. Our guest during this segment of the program drops by about 3 times a month. I think it works out that way, Ken, when we have a fifth Thursday.
It does
in the month. Yeah. So we've got one of those months, and it may not come around for a while again like this.
I think you're right.
Which means we may have to have you come by a couple of other special times if any other events come up. But usually when you drop by, you've always got a list of some people that the department is looking for.
Never fails. I brought a couple more names with me today. I always try and I don't want to show any bias, so I always bring one female and one male so that we can do swift justice, if you will. The first person that I brought today that we're looking for is an individual by the name of Tasha Apodaca. The last name spelling for her is Appodaca. It looks like she's out of the Nevada area, but she's got a warrant for $5,000 for the possession of marijuana. She is born in 1984, so she's about 30 years of age. She's 5'5", 130 pounds with brown hair, brown eyes. We're also looking for Justin Bartlome. He's from the Twin Falls area. He's about 21 years of age, born in 94, March to be exact. He's 5'9", 160 pounds with sandy hair and brown eyes. His warrant's for $25,000 for burglary. If anybody knows where Mr. Bartlome or Miss Apodaca are at, they can call us at Crime Stoppers, where you can remain anonymous for a cash reward at 732-5387, or contact us at dispatch at 735-1911.
You know, you've mentioned before sometimes these people don't know that you're looking for them. Has anybody ever actually heard you on the air and said, wow, and called up and said, I'm here?
You know, I haven't had the call from dispatch letting us know that it was a tip received from the radio program. I am aware that there have been callers who have contacted our Crime Stoppers number to remain anonymous, and those individuals have been located that way.
Of course, some people don't want to be found, but we do occasionally, as you say, there are people out there who've done something, don't realize they were in trouble, and they want to do the right thing at some point.
Right, and it's not uncommon almost on a daily basis to see people not realize that they had a warrant or realize that they missed a court date and show up to the sheriff's office and just turn themselves in.
You're talking off air with me earlier about the warmer weather on the way, although it's been a pretty warm winter. And I made some wisecrack when I got back on the air about St. Patrick's Day, but you managed to get through that without anybody getting killed.
Absolutely, yes.
Which was a good thing, and maybe people are getting the word. But a lot of summertime activities come along, and boating was one you mentioned as well.
Yeah, we've seen some increase in DUIs, but with the warmer weather, we're starting to see more boat traffic out on our waterways, and also some ATVs and whatnot starting to come out and go to the sand dunes and up into the South Hills and whatnot. And just a reminder that, after the winter season passes and you get out and start looking at your toys and your equipment and whatnot, that registrations expire. So make sure you take a look at the hint on your or the bow of your boat. Check out those numbers. Make sure that if you are expired, you make contact with the DMV and get the registration taken care of that way, or your off-road stickers on your ATVs and four-wheelers and whatnot. Make sure that those are all up to date. That'll avoid you some costly penalties. We also wanted to just let everybody know that we have a Boating Idaho course scheduled on the 16th of April at 9 a.m., and that training will take place at 450 6th Avenue West in our new annex. Deputy Meyer with the Range Division will be teaching anybody who wants to come out and take the course boat safety, the requirements, types of equipment you need on your vessel, laws and rules in the river and how to navigate that. So if you're interested, it's open to all members of the public. You can check that out at our Facebook site or contact us at the sheriff's office at 736-4110.
You know, I got a boater's license when I was 10, which I don't know. When I was growing up in western New York State, you could do that way back in the day. I don't know if they still issue them to people that young, but because we had so many lakes in the area, a lot of times, if mom and dad needed something, there was a store on the marina. So some kid could jump in a boat and go down that way. And since my dad, he patrolled usually in a boat. Guy was 6'6" tall with that big Stetson on, and he was patrolling and out there on the water. I guess that he made up his mind. He'd seen so many other people who didn't boat well. He put us all through the course when we were 10 years old as kids. But I don't think I've been back on a boat or have been powering a boat probably since I was 18. It might be good for someone in my situation to actually have a refresher course.
Sure, absolutely. Just come down and refresh yourself with the rules of the water, if you will. They're very similar to the rules of the road. Know what it means to violate a wake zone, or how much distance you need to pass within another vessel who has a skier in the water without a wake. Just to be able to know what we look for on a regular basis and what you could potentially get jammed up for, because that type of boating operation is negligent. It's a great free course that we offer for people to come down and refresh themselves with the waterways and what it takes to operate a vessel safely, and to know what we're looking for, so that our deputies are out regularly doing inspections on boats. And oftentimes, if we find vessels with children in them and whatnot, where there's not enough life jackets, or the fire extinguisher is missing or is in the red zone, we issue citations for things like that. It's just good to know what we're looking for so that you're prepared.
I was going to say, they don't have solid lines or dotted lines out on the water, so
Right.
But the rules are very similar still to the rules of the road.
Yep, you stay on the right. When there's a vessel approaching you, you want to stay on the right, just like you would on the roadway, on a highway.
We'll see you again next. It's going to be soon. It might even be next week because we're in April, right?
Right.
Well, I've got to look at the calendar, but you probably already know that. So
I got it all figured out.
All right. That's why he's the man with the badge.
I'll be here rain or shine.
Ken Menzel joining us from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department in
Thanks,
studio.
Bill.
Thank you. It's 8:40, 39 degrees at our studios. More of Top Story coming up in just a couple of minutes. I wanted to mention, if we could, we'll probably bring this up again sometime in the next few days, and as the court-martial approaches, we'll be talking considerably more about Bo Bergdahl. There's a fellow right now being interviewed, I noticed on television, who apparently has some knowledge of the situation and had actually served with him in Afghanistan. And, again, maybe as one of the callers pointed out, the people up in the Haley-Bellevue area have finally given up on this guy and realize the damage that he caused. And I don't think he set out intentionally to do it, but it just shows you, because he was such a fool, that he was, unfortunately, he was duped by the enemy, used by the enemy, and that he cost the lives of people he served with. Now, he may not have intended that, but it happened. So intent really becomes somewhat secondary here. The Daily Beast, which was a publication until yesterday I was not familiar with, and as I mentioned, I shared with you some of the words from a man who served with him. In the first half hour of the program today, I shared with you some of the words, but there's another story in the Daily Beast, which I always assumed was a very liberal publication. Don't know that much about it. But there's also a second column there from one of the writers, and it says everything the White House told you about Bo Bergdahl was wrong. They knew it was wrong, folks. It's just like Benghazi. When they said, it's a film from a California filmmaker, it has upset these people, so they're going out and they're impaling Americans. Yes, yeah, it's a terrible shame. Yeah. The very same people we helped to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi are out there upset and killing Americans. But you know what? We'll be able to deal with those people. It wasn't about the film. That was just a cover story. They knew exactly what was going on. This White House is one series of lies after another. And now, since he doesn't have to worry about re-election, they're just, they're making sure the ground is going to be clear for Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, who were his minions, and I'm sure that they both know things about him. So he's going to stay quiet and help tell a few more lies in order to smooth the path for them. And when most of his friends in media are running interference as well, other than those of us in talk radio, there's not a whole lot we can do about this. It's 40 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 8:46. This writer at Daily Beast says that his capture, release, and now charge became a parable of how narratives about war in Afghanistan did not pan out. The soldier whose service, Susan Rice, then the U.S. National Security Advisor, once characterized as, quote, honorable, unquote, and whose release came at the price of 5 prisoners, could now himself end up in an American prison for life. The question is, was there anything that maybe they don't feel they have enough evidence because the intent may not be there? But could he have faced a firing squad? A number of weeks ago, and if you're a regular listener to Top Story, a number of weeks ago, late January, I guess it was, I had a fellow on the air on the anniversary date of the Shuttle Challenger explosion, and he had been. There were a lot of celebrities on that team, Sally Ride and Neil Armstrong, who looked into the matter of the Shuttle Challenger disaster. But my friend, Steve Heil, retired Air Force colonel, was actually the administrator of that commission. Steve is one of the most mild-mannered people that I've ever met. Served his country for 20 years, from 1967 to 1987 in the U.S. Air Force before retiring. And he said last night, he would be volunteering to serve on that firing squad, if and so that came about. This is how people feel who've actually served honorably in the military. And I know you've got liberals out there who don't understand that, but I have a lot of friends. I try to just get whatever information I can from them and understand how their culture works. Since you are so dependent on other people in uniform, it is one of the most heinous things someone can do is to desert a post and then lead to the deaths of those people they served with. It may not rise, as I say, to the intent of a Benedict Arnold who was willing to sell his country down the river. But certainly, this man's actions are just abominable. They're deplorable. And the normal liberal callers we hear who chime in to try to defend this guy haven't been with us lately, have they? What does that tell you? Maybe it's starting to sink in. They should be embarrassed too. 848, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com online means you can hear us anywhere around the world. Our telephone number is 736-0300. That is 736-0300. You're up next.
Bill, it's like you say, it's a hard thing to talk about there because we don't know exactly what happened. But it's just like everything else in life. There's rules, and the rules are there for certain reasons because actions have consequences. I mean, if you drive on a road and you drive recklessly, you're going to kill somebody.
Yes.
If you go in the military and they tell you not to go somewhere and you do, you're going to get somebody hurt. Same thing here. Maybe he's a little bit leftist and got disingenuous when he was there and didn't like what was going on. But it endangered a lot of people, including himself. And it's ridiculous. And when you break rules, there's consequences and anything.
You got to also ask yourself about the intelligence of his parents. I mean, I didn't think, even though they looked like a bunch of granola chomping hippies, I assume they had some intelligence, but the old man was telling him, follow your conscience if you want to leave. Now, maybe the old man meant just go see your CEO and tell him you're done, that you can no longer do this, instead of just packing up and heading out for India, which is what he claimed he was going to be doing. But you know what? I question their patriotism. I question their commitment. You wonder why they would have ever sent their son into the military or told him, yes, go ahead. Because they don't seem like the type of people who actually back the mission.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like when a kid wants a dog, so you get him a dog. Then he realizes the dog's not any fun.
Yeah, you got to walk it and clean up after it, and
yes. But that's similar. It sounds like a good idea at the time you get there, and then all of a sudden it's not. But you don't do that kind of stuff. And if he did give information to the enemy that caused deaths of many people, then the charges against him are warranted.
Yeah, and I thank you for the call. I think that you could have even said, again, I don't know how this is spelled out in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but I think that perhaps they're actually being somewhat lenient. I think this man, because of his actions, could be put up against a wall and ventilated. 10 minutes now from 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. It is still 40 at our studios, and of course you can reach me by dialing 736-0300 or email bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Last name spelled Colley. I don't check media, or that is email, as much as I probably should when you compare it to the telephones, but I do try to take a look every few minutes. We have another caller, I believe, joining us on Top Story, and we'll get to our caller in just a moment. Caller, if you hold on, we'll be there in about 30 seconds. I do want to mention our good friends at Western States Bus Services, where they're hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. And you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Yeah, Bill, I'm calling back quickly. I hope that in defense of the people up in the Sun Valley area. Haley is different than Ketchum. So just to clear that up quickly. When I went and saw Mark Luttrell's movie Lone Survivor, and I said, here they were literally trying to go extract a leader, from the Taliban, and then I don't remember what order this happened, but then when I realized the human carnage that was that Luttrell went through in this movie, which was true. And then I watched as Bo Bergdahl, a damn traitor, got Obama released 5 of these leaders, and the carnage that went happened with Luttrell. And I said, here, we just released another 5 of them. And I was furious. And then when Susan Rice, comes out and says that he was served with honor, and then, of course, red-haired lady, whatever, she works for I can't think of her name. Oh,
well, tell you what, we're plowing ground we've already plowed already on that, and frankly, in a 2-hour show, I would appreciate it if people would limit it to 1 telephone call per day, because I hear from people who say I'd call more often, but I don't know if I could get through with the people who are the repeat callers and the like. But I prefer to keep it that way, so we perhaps give some other folks an opportunity to at least chime in from time to time. It's 8:53:40 at our studios, and I do appreciate every call. Don't get me wrong. I do appreciate every call, and sometimes if you have an opportunity after being on the air and you want to do a follow-up, maybe perhaps you can shoot me an email, and I realize I don't give that email address out nearly as often as I should. bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, last name spelled Colley. I also want to mention quickly, too, coming up next Wednesday, we had, of course, Dr. Jonathan Tripp in the studio with us yesterday from Tripp Family Medicine. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine takes place here on the air every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Next week, we're going to do somewhat of an expanded show from about 8:20 until 9 o'clock with the doctor, and got a lot to talk about. Of course, he talks about infectious diseases. He talks about preventative care, all of these issues that come up with his patients and family practice because he sees people from infancy all the way to well past 100 years old. And he has a background because of that family practice and everything from communicable diseases to vaccinations to even the person coming in with the simplest of rashes or the worst of rashes. So he'll be joining us again on next Wednesday morning between 8:20 and 9 o'clock. I also want to point out our good friends at Tripp Family Medicine are located there on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office. Bill Colley with you today until 10 o'clock this morning, and a couple of other things we'll be getting to, I'm sure, in the next hour of the program. I haven't even touched on it yet today, but I wanted to mention it maybe quickly before we wrapped up this hour so we can pick up with it again following 9 o'clock news from Fox. This morning, it really started with me yesterday. I was looking at a website that was showing pictures of some of the Americans who were killed. I think it's 3 Americans. Originally it said it was 2. Now it's 3 who were on that German plane that crashed into a mountainside in Europe. And in a part of the Alps where you have 3 or 4 countries who are going to have various jurisdiction depending on where debris is actually scattered. So I'm seeing all of these identifications of the various people who were on the plane, Americans and some other foreign people who were on the plane, and their photographs and their names and their hometown were coming up on various websites yesterday, but I didn't see any names of pilots. Why would the media be withholding the names of pilots? Now, because I'm a radio talk show host, my immediate suspicion is one of the pilots could have been Ali Akbar, and he could have decided he was going to fly that plane into the mountainside so he can send himself straight to heaven in his 72 versions. Or virgins, I guess that is. Well, it depends on which Quran you're using. 8:56 now on our program. It turns out that is not his name. His name is actually a very German name. But early this morning, as I was getting ready for the show, I raised the question online last night on my Twitter account as well as my Facebook account, and other people started saying, yeah, why is it we aren't hearing the name of this pilot who apparently purposefully crashed this plane into a mountainside? It brings up, I think, an excellent question. So this morning his name was finally released, and you look at it and you say, okay, German, all right. But did he have friends who were converting him to Islam? And maybe he just had not changed out the name yet. Because not long after his name appeared on the Drudge Report this morning, there was a link to the story with his identification. On Facebook, a French language page popped up. And it said that he was a hero. I could translate some of it. I haven't had a French course, trust me, since 1977. So I'm going back a long time. But I could see and I could tell what some of it actually meant. And it said he was a hero of the Islamic State. Now, perhaps the Islamic State is just taking credit for this. because somebody's got to take credit. Maybe they feel it would benefit them even if they didn't have anything to do with it. Or maybe someone was doing it as a prank. Some wise guy out there. But it said support him. This was what got me. It said that it was in support of him as a hero of the Islamic State. And I noticed when I first saw this, because I did the search after his name came out, when I first saw this, I noticed that there were about 30 people who'd already hit like on that page. A few minutes later, it was 60 people. Then it was 120. A few minutes later, I looked at it again, it was over 150. And not long after that, Facebook suspended the page. So we have some questions that need to be answered about this. And if it turns out that he was studying for conversion to the religion of peace, or that he had some sympathy with the Islamic State as an outsider, then I think we need to know that. And this would be more than just workplace violence now, wouldn't it? Some more thoughts on that on the way. Bill Colley with you till 10 o'clock this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also, newsradio1310.com online means you can hear us anywhere around the world. It's 8:59:41 at our studios. I was mentioning in the last segment of the program, and of course, media will do whatever it can. See, if you gotta understand how the system works. We don't know a lot about this German pilot, and his name is was it Andreas Lubitz? I think it is. Doesn't sound. He comes from the old East Germany. He has a protractor on his Facebook page, and the protractor then has a German statement about something about divided Germany. So he grew up in what was the old East Germany, but he's a relatively young guy, so he wouldn't have any references or recollection of what communist Eastern Europe was like back when his country was divided, because it reunified again about 25 years ago. And even though the Easterners are still lagging the Westerners in economic development, things have been improving there quite rapidly. And over time, people will have no memory of what it was like under the communist ogres who once controlled that part of the country. But just because his name sounds like your standard German Lutheran name doesn't mean that he could not have come under some sway of somebody, because these European countries are overrun with Muslim immigrants. And a lot of the Muslim immigrants look around and they blame their own plight because they can't find work or they don't last long in whatever work they find. They're blaming the culture around them instead of themselves. They may be losers, but they don't look in the mirror and go, aha, I know who that is. It does not strike them that way. It's the fact that they're living among the infidel. And of course, if they can just vanquish the infidel, then suddenly things will turn around for them and everything will be okay. And they'll show the rest of the world, we're superior to you. He may have developed some affinity for these people. Maybe we'll learn that in the next few days. Now, from a journalist standpoint, you don't jump the gun on that. I completely understand that. But I'm a talk show host. I was a journalist, but I haven't been for a very, very long time, at least a dozen years now. I'm just telling you, you've got people in media who would try their best to dance around that possibility, to be politically correct. And if it takes days and days and days before the story finally comes out, they will figure out how to slow it down. Because, we don't want to offend those people in the religion of peace. Because, if we offend them, those peaceful people might kill us. Well, they're already killing us. Well, yeah, but gee willikers, they might kill some more of us. So this is what we deal with people on the... But media, on the other hand, if it was a fellow like a Timothy McVeigh, we had some goofball call this program some weeks ago, saying that you never talk about Timothy McVeigh as being a Christian terrorist. Well, let me tell you something. He didn't kill in the name of Jesus Christ. There's a huge difference there. What kind of idiocy do you have that prevents you from making that connection or seeing that logic in all of that? Timothy McVeigh grew up just outside of Lockport, New York. His dad worked at a factory that my dad had worked at, although my dad had long left that plant before McVeigh's dad came along. But I know a little bit about his family history, because my dad still knew people who worked with McVeigh's father. McVeigh was raised as a Roman Catholic until his parents split when he was about 13 years old. And at that point, his dad stopped taking him to church. His mother blew out of town. His dad stopped going to church. It was his mother's thing to go. And Timothy McVeigh got away from religion and basically became an agnostic, if not a complete atheist. So you can't make the same comparison there. And if you try, you're just looking like the idiot you actually are, because you're not informed in that situation. But media wanted to try to connect him, and they were playing right along with it, to some Christian movements out there and saying that these people are violent and they have to be stopped and we have to get rid of them. We have to tear up their books and we have to stop their hatefulness because they believe in sin. Yeah, that's a serious issue for American lefties because, of course, they don't believe in judgment or sin and everything goes in their worlds. They have this ability to just put on the blinders and ignore everything else around them and then tell you that narrow view of the world is the real world. But obviously the rest of us who walk around without blinders on can see otherwise. I'm referencing media because I am just so fed up. We already know with a big election coming in the United States next year that folks in mainstream media are already lining up to get rid of people they don't like. And it's not a literal assassination. It's a figurative assassination of candidates. And it gets them out of the way. They did it with Herman Cain. Remember in 2012, Herman Cain, there's a woman who says Herman Cain pinched her bottom. And then another woman came forward and said, yeah, Herman Cain pinched my bottom too. And people who knew Herman Cain said, Herman Cain? Are you nuts? Herman Cain? We'd never do anything like that. People said, well, you never really know a candidate, do you? No, I mean, sure, he may look like a pleasant fellow and have a good sense of humor and go to church on Sundays, but say he is a Christian, and we know how those Christians are. But as soon as Herman Cain dropped out of the presidential race, his accusers disappeared, and the media interest in the story disappeared. Do you see what they were up to? There was this invented scandal in order to get rid of Herman Cain. And Herman Cain allowed them to do it, unfortunately, and he walked away from all of this. He said enough. He didn't want it in his life. He has a family and friends and a good job, and he just said, this is not something I can any longer deal with. And they're looking to do it again to candidates going into next year. There was a story yesterday from a publication called The New Yorker. I've seen it on shelves before. There are still a handful of these newspaper stands around that have magazines that cater mainly now to an older crowd because younger people, either don't read stuff in print, they go to do it online, or they just plain don't read at all. So, you only have a handful of people out there with weakening eyesight who actually read printed stuff any longer. The Washington Post picked up on this story yesterday after it appeared in the New Yorker. A fellow by the name of John Cassidy at the New Yorker was talking about his hate for Ted Cruz, who is a U.S. Senator from Texas who has announced he's running for president on the Republican Party line. And this is what Mr. Cassidy said about him. Quote, to many Americans, he is the uppity loudmouth who in the fall of 2013, less than a year into his first term as a senator, helped bring the federal government to a halt. Unquote. Now, I am a conservative radio talk show host. And we have several of the big syndicated stars on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. You will hear Rush Limbaugh in less than an hour. You will hear Sean Hannity later today. You will hear Glenn Beck on your drive home this afternoon. You get my drift. If any of us, whether we be nationally syndicated or local hosts, said about a candidate who's got a minority background, you see the name Cruz is not an Anglo name. Despite the fact that his mother's side of the family, Irish and Italian, although they were terribly discriminated against at one time, though you don't hear them complaining about the need for reparations. But Mr. Cruz's father is Latino. And most Latino who are running for public office in this country just happen to be of the liberal persuasion. So if Sean Hannity or Glenn Beck or Rush Limbaugh or even me, Bill Colley, went on the air and we said about a candidate who was Latino or perhaps even a person of color, a black person, we called them uppity, we would be out of our jobs. Because from what I recall, that uppity phrase, when you see all of these old movies about the Old South where maybe 10% of the population ever supported the Klan, Most people were absolutely abhorred by what they were doing, but they don't like to tell you that part of it either. But that phrase is always used, uppity, just before they go out and lynch someone, isn't it? But it was okay to say that about Ted Cruz because the writer is a liberal and Cruz is a conservative. He's a Latino, but he's uppity. Later, the guy issued some sort of apology. But even the liberal writer who was following it up at the Washington Post said, you've just done a great disservice, because he said, this is exactly what people believe about liberal media. Well, yeah, and the guy definitely came right out and spelled it out, exactly what he is. And he's still working. And he has been working at that magazine since 1995 and probably has a long, long journalism pedigree before that. But it shows you exactly what we deal with media in this country and how difficult it is for anybody who is not playing the liberal, politically correct ball game to get ahead. Because next year, all of these candidates who have an R behind their names, and again, I don't support each and every one of them, and I think there are a lot of failings within the Republican Party we really seriously need to address. But next year, each and every one of them has two opponents, the Democrats and the media. On the other hand, the Democrats have just one opponent, and that's the Republicans. So if you're a Republican and you're going into any election in this day and age, and it's not just on the national level, if you ever pick up that editorial page of the Times News on a Sunday, you will find that Republicans also have enemies even on the local level. You can do it with the Idaho Statesman, same thing. Enemies on the local level in media. A Democrat comes along and it's like, oh, let me give you a big wet kiss. I saw this working in news myself. I was working in a television newsroom nearly 20 years ago. And I had to go out one day and interview a local politician. She was a flaming liberal Democrat. We had this area called the producer pod, where the daily assignment editor who picked the stories that you covered, you better please him. He was liberal. You better please him. If you don't and you were a conservative, you might not get the best stories, which meant that your career might not advance. And then the four producers who sat with him in this little area, show producers, all of them mainly flaming libs. And I was going to go interview this liberal politician, and one of the guys looked at him and said, oh, you got to say hello to her for me. Long time no see. And they all went, yeah. A couple of days later, I mentioned a friend of mine. He was a very conservative Roman Catholic candidate for the city council. And as soon as I mentioned his name, they all started rolling their eyes. This is the mindset that exists in newsrooms today. They talk about diversity. What they mean, they're going to hire a lot of people who are left-handed. And they're going to go about and say, well, we need an Asian employee, we need a Latino employee, we need a black employee, we need a transgender employee, and that this is how they hire people. How about hiring the best available person? Well, we can't do that. So they fudge it and claim that these are the best available people, and they go out and they do that. But they don't hire conservatives very often. And if they do and they've discovered that they've accidentally done it, then they're very unhappy and they will try to ride you out of that business on a rail. I have been there. I bear witness to it. I see how it works. And then I ended up becoming a television news director in another city following that. And I did that in a couple of different cities before I finally got sick of it, because someone would quit who may have an Asian background. And my regional manager would say to me on the telephone, well, you're going to have to find another Asian. Well, yeah, but I've got 100 applicants here, and I'm just looking for the best. No, you've got to hire an Asian. Do you get what we're up against here? It's not about the best. It's about this rainbow coalition and just putting that out for people every day on these TV shows. And wow, gee, Willikers, they're doing a wonderful job hiring minorities. What if the minorities are dingling? I'm not saying they all are, but what if that happens to be the case? Well, you still got to hire them, Bill. You wonder why this country is going down the tubes. Because it's not just media. This is the way it is everywhere. Because we're walking on eggshells. No one dares say what the truth is. And everything's falling down around us. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Speaking of the politically correct, I've got a whole series of stories about politically correct ding-dongs. If we get a chance, I want to share them this hour of the program. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. I want to mention again our friends at Western States Bus Services, and I do like to mention as often as I can the people who are highly supportive of this program. In fact, if you like what we do, you might think about giving the folks down the hall in the advertising department a call, because, of course, it costs money to run a radio station with all of the lights and all of the other electronic gizmos and staffing and the like. It may sound like it's all a bunch of fun, but the people who do this, they don't do it just because it's the right thing to do. I mean, they may think that too as well, but everyone has to feed their families. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. That means snow days. Even today, because I haven't had a snow day since sometime in the 1970s, but even today, when I hear someone talking about school being closed, I get that little chill up my spine, that pleasurable one that I used to get when I'd hear it when I was a kid. You'd never quite forget how good that sounds. The pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Are you a person of faith? Maybe you are a Christian. Maybe you are a very Orthodox Jew. There may be even some people in the audience who are Muslims, and I don't like to paint them all with one brush because, let's be honest about it, the King of Jordan's a very good guy, and he's a Muslim. And so there are people out there who do believe, though, that we are absolutely going down the wrong road in this culture, and that certain things that have historically always been considered wrong remain wrong, no matter what other people try and tell us. So if you are a member of one of those faiths, and for instance, you think that two men crawling into bed together is wrong, or two women crawling into bed together is wrong, or people changing their organs around or having them removed and changed around, that's just something unusual, and it just makes you queasy. Does that mean you're a hater? Of course not. It means you're a believer, and that you believe in something bigger and higher than all of the rest of us. I bring this up because of a story I saw today on the AP Wire about a legislator here in the state of Idaho. It's 9:26. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 43 at our studios. Quick warm-up today. Going to be potentially into the 70s, so we hope you enjoy it. You're listening, of course, to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. That means online. You can hear us anywhere around the world. An Idaho Republican lawmaker's political website has been snapped up by a group claiming to be gay rights activists. See, first of all, it's the Orwellian use of language. Gay only meant happy for a long, long time. You realize the New York Times won't even use the word homosexual today, which is the scientific term, but because it might hurt somebody's feelings. Especially half the staff at the newspaper. Decorated with rainbows and replaced with text requesting that the legislature meet with same-sex marriage supporters. We demand a meeting, and you better meet with us or else. We're going to tell people you hate us. No, I just don't want anything to do with you. Oh, then you're a hater. State Representative Paul Shepard from Riggins is backing a non-binding resolution urging Congress to impeach federal judges who violate the U.S. Constitution. This man needs our support. Shepard contends that recent court rulings overturning state bans on same-sex marriages violate the Constitution. Shepard hadn't seen the website's new look when contacted by the Associated Press, although Republican legislative leadership had alerted him of the change. According to a domain register website, Shepard's website expired earlier this month and was taken over on March 22nd. So these people are out there essentially to ride him hard. Bring him out so we may know him. Whatever it be, this, it seems to me, is exactly what's going on here, because he has some traditional values and beliefs, and he believes the people in each state, because of the 10th Amendment, should have a say in how this works. And unfortunately, you've got the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco that runs roughshod over us. All of those old Clinton appointees out there who are out there doing whatever they feel they should be doing that makes them feel good, rubbing themselves against trees or whatever else, and that should be the law of the land. Unfortunately, if you don't agree with that, you're the bad guy. I happen to see so many of these in the last couple of days. Here's one from the New York Post. A video sting operation shows Cornell University's assistant dean for students, Joe Scafito, agreeing to everything suggested by an undercover muckraker posing as a Moroccan student, including allowing ISIS freedom fighters to conduct training camps on his campus. Okay. Meanwhile, that's in Ithaca, New York. In fact, we have a local counselor here in Twin Falls. One of her best friends went to college there. She was telling me that. Ithaca, New York. Cornell is located there. It's also home to Ithaca College, which used to have a football team one time, I think, coached by both Maxie Baughan and George Seifert, the legendary 49ers coach. Ithaca College student government passed a bill last week to establish an online reporting system for hurt feelings over microaggressions. Microaggressions are statements by a person from a privileged group that belittles or isolates a member of an unprivileged group as it relates to race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and more. These microaggressions include phrases like, quote, they were dancing like they were having a seizure, unquote, and, quote, you're too sensitive, unquote, and, quote, I'm so OCD, unquote. Those things are now going to be banished from campus, and if you say them, you could end up being in serious trouble, perhaps expelled. I'm not making this up. I am not making it up. Oh, and at Brown University, a woman was going to speak about the allegations of rape culture. She disagrees and says it's creating too much of a bad climate on campus. So many students had their feelings hurt, they had to set up a room with Play-Doh in it, coloring books, bubbles, and cookies. So pillows and blankets too. So students who were so traumatized by this woman coming to speak on campus could go play with the Play-Doh. Maybe they could watch Barney reruns too. We're all back in kindergarten, aren't we? 9:30. Hey, I'll take some of your calls in just a few minutes. 43 right now at our studios on Top Story. Hey, in a follow-up to what we were just talking about with politically correct culture, I have a piece that comes from Crisis Magazine. Can Christianity survive the sexual revolution? That question should have been asked 40, 50 years ago, written by Stephen Baskerville. And if you wonder, I've got the paper right here in my hand. If you wonder who he is, he's a fellow at the Howard Center for Family, Religion, and Society and a research fellow at the Independent Institute. He holds a Ph.D. from London School of Economics, and his second book, Taken into Custody, The War Against Fathers, Marriage, and the Family, was published by Cumberland House Publishing in 2007. It's a very long story, but he opens with this question. When was the last time anyone heard a sermon that condemned the evils of fornication or adultery or cohabitation or divorce or bearing children outside wedlock, let alone human sexuality? He says, controlling these sins is a core Christian value. Then a very long story follows from that. And he says, even your pastors in most churches have been, well, they don't want to be criticized as being hateful or bigoted. And they are fearing what would happen if they came out and spoke about these issues. So they dance around them as best as they could or can. And unfortunately, the message gets watered down. But this is exactly what the controllers on the liberal left want. 9:35, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach the show at 736-0300 or email me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. You're on the air. You're on Top Story, in fact, as well.
Bill, you need to watch out about using the word rode hard when you're talking about gay rights stuff. This whole thing about being haters just because you're against it because of our religion or whatever is so far left. It's not even funny. And if they want to use that, then they're haters, because if we don't want to bake them a cake or take their picture, then we're haters and they're not. They're accepted. But yet we can prove our point by just having 3 islands, putting heterosexuals on one island, gays on another island, and lesbians on another island. Which one's going to die out?
After a couple of generations, it would be kind of a couple of depopulated islands going on there.
That proves a point all by itself, doesn't it?
First of all, number one point you brought up, maybe I should say rode softly. That might make people feel better. And number 2, years ago, I remember interviewing a preacher, and he'd gotten arrested because during a gay rights march, he had the temerity to stand on a street corner reading a Bible aloud as they marched by. So he was arrested by the local police in his city. And I was doing an interview with this fellow, and he said to me, he said, look, let's take an argument. He said, I'm not a believer in evolution. He says, I'm a fundamentalist, Protestant. He said, I'm not a believer in evolution. But he said, even if evolution is true, then he said, homosexuality would be an evolutionary dead end, right? Because there's no reproduction going on, so it would have died out long, long ago. And then he said, we also decoded the human genome. We found no gay gene. So therefore, what do we have left other than the fact that people are making a choice?
It's all choices, Bill, and I think we all have to do this choice. We let people have their rights, and everybody has the right to do whatever they want. Whatever happens in their bedroom, I don't want to know. I don't care.
Right. And I've made that argument. We're not kicking their doors down, demanding they cease and desist. But the fact of the matter is they keep coming along saying they want us to join in, is what they're looking at.
I think what we need to do as Christians and everything else is when somebody says they're offended about something, let's say prayer or pledge of allegiance or whatever, we need to produce two people that are offended by not being able to do that for everyone that does it for us, and we can do it easily.
I'll tell you what, many years ago, I had to spend a week away from a job because a lesbian coworker said I was making it a hostile work environment because of the issues I talked about on air. And the people I work for buckled to her complaints and decided that I should take a week off and go home and do nothing so she would feel better about her job. I had a friend at the time. He used to work as the chief of staff for U.S. Senator Strom Thurmond. He was the president of the Georgia State Associated Press, and even for a long time, he was the president of American Seniors Association. And he had said to me, he said, someone on the Christian side has to stand up and say that they feel that they're working in an oppressive zones, because he said, we don't speak up often enough. And the fact of the matter is, maybe somebody else is making me uncomfortable. I had a boss one time tell me on an Ash Wednesday, I walked in after having been to church, he looked at my forehead and said, I don't like my reporters making political statements. When I have to deal with stuff like that, that's okay. He can get away with that, right? And that was considered okay. But because I talked about these issues on the radio, I had to spend a week away from work.
Yeah, but Bill, my point is that you probably, as a good employee, went and washed off your ash without saying a word. But yet the other side just stomps their little feet down and beats on the table.
No, I did not.
Until we all buckle and calls us names and makes us shrink.
No, well, I did not wash my forehead. In fact, I went to
well, that's good for you. But what I'm saying is we got to stop shrinking. That's a tactic.
And I thank you for the call. We've got a hard break coming up here in just a moment. I'll point out I kept my ashes on. I went to the local courthouse, got on the elevator, and the lawyers started making fun of me. Well, you know what? There's a place for lawyers, and it's very hot. 9:40, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Hey, more on this subject coming up in just a couple of minutes. Part of this, argument that goes on, and this really has nothing to do with anybody's personal sexuality, but is that we've got a great many people that are teaching all of these courses in women's studies, and I'm borrowing this phrase because I saw it in a story today, in the Washington Examiner. I'm actually quoting what it's called on some campuses, queer studies. So you've got women's studies and queer studies and all of these different courses where they're teaching people nothing about, worthwhile stuff that they'll need to go find a job with after college, but they're all telling them that it's these evil white males who are oppressing them, and that we have to remove all of this masculine aggression from the culture. And if only we do that, well, then we'll be subject to being conquered by any other race. I mean, no. People wouldn't be doing that now, would they? So I saw a story today that I think backs this up, and every time I see this headline, Rush Limbaugh has mentioned this before, and I'll tell you what, he's spot on. This is an effort to feminize the American culture. This comes from Business Insider, and the headline is, Maybe Football Shouldn't Be Played at All. Kevin Laurier, he claims he's a fan, but he said because of concussions, it's time to start thinking about banning the game. Look, I played organized football from the 5th grade on. I was not good enough to play college ball. Not the fastest guy in the world, and I'm terribly nearsighted and don't have the sight in one eye. And because of that held me back. So I just had certain physical things that I knew I wasn't going to be good enough to play, but I loved the game. As a kid, I loved especially football, hockey, and maybe to just a slightly lesser extent baseball, and I ate, slept, and dreamt those things constantly. And it's all I ever wanted to do was to either be close to the games. I got into broadcasting essentially to become a play-by-play guy, and then I ended up getting into news and ended up into talk radio and the like. But my whole goal in the beginning was getting behind a microphone so I could do play-by-play and stay close to all of these games. I'm telling you right now, I remember a few times playing football when I got hit, and we called it getting your bell rung. And I saw the stars or the little birdies in the cartoons that go around your head, chirping away. I had those moments. I saw that happen to friends on the field. I saw friends carted off with shoulders dislocated, legs broken. My cousin tore up a knee and it ruined his opportunity to play college football at Iowa because they were sniffing around looking at him. And he would have gone off and played for Hayden Fry, and probably was Hayden Fry was coaching there at the time? I believe so. Would have had some probably great success. Maybe even played in the pros because we had a number of guys when I was growing up who were already local legends. Marv Hubbard, who had been a fullback with the Raiders. Chuck Christ, who was a defensive back with the Saints. Bob Torrey was a fullback with the New York Giants. He played just down the road at my dad's old high school. Bill Bergdahl, who was a linebacker for the Bengals and Eagles. These guys were all local legends, and we all wanted to emulate them. And we looked up to them. Now, maybe not so much because of their personal characteristics, but because they were great, great ball players. And they really put some effort into what they were doing, and they played the game the way it should be played. I avoided any of the really serious injuries other than I've got a sore hip on the right side, sore knees, and one sore shoulder. But other than that, it's part of growing old. I mean, you get bruised and bumped and everything else, and you learn from it. But even this guy admits in his story, even though he's talking about banning the game, he admits in his story something I think very important here. The overwhelming majority of people who play football, the percentage is just astronomically high, never end up with any post-concussion syndromes. They don't. So there you go. And it's a rough game going in. You can get hurt. That's fairly obvious. I don't understand all of the arguments about this. Try to outlaw it. It's a bit like trying to outlaw guns. When I was a kid, I remember I would play in pickup hockey games whenever I got the chance. If I was walking down the street and there were some guys who were on the frozen court at the local park, and they were playing, and somebody said, "Here's a stick," I'd drop everything I was doing so I could run out and play. And I had friends I ended up playing against who ended up going on and playing in college ranks and the like. Some in Montana, I think, a couple of them, in fact. So I got really close to all of these people, and I just loved the game and every aspect of it. And my parents finally prohibited me from playing hockey because a stick took out a chunk of one of my ears, which didn't bother me a whole heck of a lot. It's people out looking at you going, I really thought you were good looking until I saw that there's a scar on your ear. That one's never come up. But I remember at the time, my parents said, you can no longer play this game. We forbade you from playing hockey. Is it forbade or forbid? Well, unfortunately, I should have been in English class as much as I was playing hockey. I wasn't. That's pretty clear. But I didn't listen to them. That was like trying to enforce the hands-free cell phone laws around the country or speed limits. Because mom and dad couldn't be with me all of the time, and someone would see me and say, hey, we're having a pickup game. I would grab skates and I would grab a stick, and if I didn't have a stick at home, someone would loan me one. You hated breaking them because they were very expensive, and replacing them as a kid on a paper route salary really wasn't easy. But the fact of the matter is you couldn't stop me from doing it. You try to ban football, you will not stop it. This game is so ingrained into our culture, it would be impossible unless you had a totalitarian state. We could all sit around and play tiddlywinks or whatever it be, or video games and grow fat and do that as the alternative. But the benefits to football and getting up and moving around and the comradeship and the teamwork and everything else far outweigh culturally any of the bad aspects of the game. Mike Huckabee is coming up in just a moment. The Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number is 736-6563. And then a couple of closing thoughts before we wrap up the program today. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. He's, of course, under fire by mainstream media, too, as well, because he's one of them. They're Christians, and that means he's highly suspect and extremely dangerous. You know, they're attacking both him and Ted Cruz for being so overtly Christian in their faith, and Bobby Jindal as well. And yet, do we want a leader who does not believe in some sort of higher power? Because if you have a leader who believes that he or she, and considering who the she's might be next year, let's hope it's a he, do we want someone who doesn't believe that a higher power is calling the shots and the higher power wants you to do the right thing? and is calling you to do right from wrong? No. See, that's the left says right from wrong are just constructs of a system that oppresses us. So, right from wrong is whatever you feel like doing. There are no right and wrong. Just go ahead and live your life. Go out on the street and we'll all just run around in one big bacchanalia and see how long that the culture actually lasts through all of that. 9:55 right now. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. So on a lighter note, I've been sitting on this story all week, no pun intended. Scientists want to mine our poop for gold. I came along this at a website called Motherboard. Maddie Stone, that's kind of like a kidney stone, I guess. That's the other end, though, isn't it? Maddie Stone is the writer. She says, our days of wasting human waste may be numbered. If Kathleen Smith of the U.S. Geological Survey has anything to say about it, she's leading, now there are probably a lot of your tax dollars going into this. She's leading a new research program that's examining the feasibility of extracting precious metals from dung. Smith will explain Tuesday at a press conference. That took place just the other day. I pulled this down on Monday. Extracting precious metals from sewage is not easy, but they believe they can find ways to do it, and they can also use some of the other backups as fertilizer. Quote, there are metals everywhere, unquote, Smith said in a statement. Quote, if you can get rid of some of the nuisance metals that currently limit how much of these biosolids we can use on fields and forests, and at the same time recover valuable metals and other elements, that's a win-win, unquote. Can you imagine? You go to a family reunion or Thanksgiving dinner and they ask you, what do you do for a living? Well, I pick through people's poo. Oh, really? Let's have another conversation after dinner. The writer goes on to say the author has worked out that the waste produced annually by 1 million Americans could contain as much as, now this got my interest, $13 million worth of metals. That's over $4 billion worth of gold coming out of our collective arses every year. I bet you didn't know that. I'm going to tell you right now, that was an absolute surprise to me. Microscopic gold-rich and lead-rich particles in a municipal biosolid sample have showed that obviously we can actually find these things, these little tiny flecks of gold, and who knew that? We thought the golden goose was just a myth when it was crapping all of those golden eggs. And here to see it in another way, it's human beings who are actually the ones who have all of this wealth coming out of our backsides. To do so, the team is working to modify extraction procedures used in industrial mining to leach metals out of minerals. Quote, traditional extractants will behave differently with the organic matter, unquote, Smith said over the phone. But, quote, if we can find an extractant that does a good job, this procedure may be incorporated into current biosolid treatments. Something stinks about that work. 9:58, Bill Colley with you. Hey, Rush Limbaugh on the way in just a few minutes. Following news from Fox at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity following Rush Limbaugh. Of course, Glenn Beck this afternoon. And then Dave Ramsey this evening. In the meantime, God willing and the creek don't rise, I'm back in this seat on Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Oh, wait a minute. It's only Thursday. All right. You'll have to see me tomorrow. All right. Yeah, I got to get up early one more day. But I'll do it for all of you. I think that much of all of you.